Did you guys see that? Did you see how I sprinted to my chair? Hey, what's going on? It's me, the guy. For the last 15 years, Halo fans have argued about something passionately for so long that their cortisol levels are shot through the roof. And that something is sprint. In other franchises, new mechanics are usually introduced and the status quo shifts without nearly as much fuss as sprint has caused in the Halo community. So, it begs the question, why? Why are Halo fans so angry about the ability to run a little bit faster, to the point that its inclusion in the remake is genuinely a sore spot? Believe it or not, there's validity to both sides, pro-running and anti-running, and I want to explain to you, dear viewer, in good faith, why each side prefers Halo with or without sprint. Now, I know that a lot of you have already been a part of this Halo community for years, but truth be told, there's a lot of people that are starting to get into Halo, whether they're excited about the Halo remake or they just became Halo pill because they went down the Halopedia rabbit hole recently and they discovered, hey, this franchise is kind of cool. And honestly, there's probably some that just aren't interested in Halo and they kind of want to know what the big deal is about sprint. So that's mostly who this video is for. So without further ado, remember to like and subscribe. Also remember to hype the video because it When Halo 1 came out, it kind of set the standard for how shooters were going to play on a controller. You could move with the control stick, jump, punch, shoot, switch between two weapons, throw grenades, pick up new weapons, or interact with objects. And then, of course, look around with the right stick. It sounds simple, but when you combine vehicles, the amount of weapons with different functions to them, the excellent musical timing, and the AI that all have their own reactive behaviors and personalities, Halo 1 felt like this really immersive, sandbox-driven shooter, where the external sandbox was as alive as the player themselves. In Halo 1, the combat foundation for how Halo games were going to be built was sort of set in stone. Future Halo games would innovate by adding new sandbox items, such as weapons that were small enough to hold in two hands, or equipment that you could kind of like put in your pocket and then deploy when you need them. But that fluid, simple player moveset was pretty much unchanged for the nearly decade-long run that the original developers of Halo, Bungie, had with the series. And needless to say, Halo was top of the world. Like, dude, Halo was king. It was a big deal. But you know, times change, and by the mid-2000s, sprinting was a mechanic that was starting to pop up in more and more games. It was still a bit of a Wild West period for the mechanic, and developers had different ideas for how it should function and feel and so on. But in 2007, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare released, and had such a satisfying feeling sprint mechanic that it went on to be copied by the wider gaming industry. To this day, the version of sprint that Call of Duty 4 created has pretty much become industry standard. Halo also tried to hop on the sprint train, but the thing is, Halo's implementation has changed a lot over the years. When fans ask, what do you think of sprint in Halo, the usual follow-up question is, well, which version of sprint? Because, yeah, each Halo game has a completely different version of the mechanic. So, to start, with Halo Reach in 2010, Bungie felt the cultural pressure that sprint needed to be in Halo. But I get the feeling that they understood just throwing sprint into Halo is kind of a big thing and could fundamentally change how Halo feels as a franchise. If sprint was going to be in Halo Reach, it had to be tastefully handled, so they built in a bunch of safeguards to this new mechanic. To start, sprint isn't actually a core part of the player's moveset in Halo Reach. Sprint was actually what's called an armor ability. Armor abilities were sandbox items that you stored in your pocket, and they kind of had a finite amount of energy when activated that would recharge when you weren't using them. One was a jetpack, the other was an invincibility shield, and of course, another was the ability to sprint. When you pressed the armor ability button, sprint was activated and it would sustain itself for something like 5 seconds before running out of energy. When you were done sprinting, you had to wait a couple of seconds and then it would begin recharging. It was a way to make sure that players couldn't just do the Call of Duty thing and spam the sprint button even when out of breath. You had a limited amount of speed and you had to make sure to use it tactically because it took a very long time to recharge. At least it felt like a really long time when you were in the heat of combat. Due to it being an armor ability and not a core part of the player's gameplay, designers had the ability to remove it from the player when they wanted. There's a part in the campaign where you had to pick up the jetpack armor ability to move on, and you had to trade away the sprint armor ability. So for a little while, you couldn't sprint, and you could feel that the encounters and the level design were built around this. They knew that players weren't just going to be speeding past encounters, so they could make things a little bit tighter, a little bit more focused. Most modes and ways of play gave players at least the ability to spawn with the armor ability sprint, but there were also others that were super compelling, you know, like the jetpack or the armor lock, which you've seen the memes about. But the built-in philosophy of sprint not being yours and being actually an external sandbox item that you could possess or could not possess depending on the developer's whim was an interesting way for Halo to sort of like have its cake and eat it too. After Halo Reach, Halo 4 went the completely opposite direction. It made sprint just a core part of the gameplay. Sprint was mapped to the left stick, which was kind of becoming the standard for shooters. In Halo 4, sprint did have a stamina system like Call of Duty. You ran until Master Chief got tired, and when you stopped sprinting, you instantly began regenerating stamina. Which means, yes, you can do the funny Call of Duty thing, where you just keep spamming the sprint button, and Chief just keeps falling in and out of sprint, and clearly out of breath and winded. 343 Industries, the guys who made Halo 4, did actually build in their own attempted safeguards by slowing the player down when you took damage while sprinting, but this could honestly be easily mitigated because the multiplayer, at least for Halo 4, had perks, kind of like Call of Duty. One of the perks completely negated that slowdown when taking damage. There was another perk that actually eliminated the stamina system, so you could just sprint forever. Now, when Halo 5 released in 2015, the FPS genre was beginning to shift away from a finite stamina system. Even Call of Duty Black Ops 3 got rid of Call of Duty's trademark stamina system. Even it wanted in on the infinite sprint. Halo 5 kept sprint as a core gameplay mechanic, and it also let you sprint forever. But they also changed quite a lot about how it worked compared to Halo 4. When you began sprinting, it took a few seconds to actually reach max speed. During this period, you could be shot and slowed down. If you did eventually reach max speed, that was it. You were locked in. There was no way to slow you down. And you had access to two different abilities. You could slide by hitting the crouch button, or you could do this shoulder charge melee attack by hitting the melee button. It's also worth noting that you couldn't recharge your shields while sprinting. So this version of sprint is kind of interesting because I think they were trying to make it serve two different functions. One was to address the criticisms of Halo Reach and Halo 4's sprint not having enough penalties while you were sprinting, while also giving the sprint ability a link to some of the new Spartan abilities Halo 5 added to Halo's core gameplay. Think of it sort of like sprint was definitely a way to get from point A to point B faster, but also act as a portal between two different combat maneuvers you could activate when encountering another player. Halo 5 was an aggressive game, and this incarnation of sprint benefited and strengthened aggressive playstyles. Now this is the weird part. In the campaign, sprint actually functioned differently. They actually removed a lot of the downsides, like no regenerating shields, and made the wind-up time shorter, kind of sacrificing some of the integrity of the sprint mechanic. But for Halo Infinite, they redesigned sprint again, and essentially made it only an 8 to 10% speed boost over your base movement speed. They removed the wind-up period to sprint, so you just kind of immediately hit max speed. They removed Spartan Charge as well, and then gave players the ability to recharge their shields while sprinting. It feels a lot slower than Halo 5 sprint, but in saying that, a bit of that classic Halo pacing returned to Halo Infinite, while still having that go fast mode mapped to the left stick or shift key or whatever for the players who want that. Now that you understand Halo's history with sprint, you can kind of see why its introduction into the franchise was not nearly as seamless and smooth as other video game franchises. Every new Halo title post-Reach tried to find new ways to integrate it more seamlessly into the Halo combat loop. For what it's worth, I do think that most people find Halo Infinite handled sprint the best by making the speed boost so minor. But then of course, there's folks like me, who kind of prefer Halo Reach's approach to sprint, making it an external sandbox item and not actually a core part of the player's moveset, even if it could have used a couple more penalties in Reach. People who like Halo 5's version of sprint enjoyed the way that sprint synergized with the rest of the Spartan abilities that game had, to make you sort of feel like a living missile, while others may dislike that approach because of how it moves the game's feel away from that old Halo feel. Ultimately, it's complicated. Everyone in the Halo community has their own feelings about Sprint. And while I think the majority of the gamer population on planet Earth doesn't care, the vocal areas of the community were fired up with the announcement that the upcoming Halo 1 remake will have Sprint. Now here's the thing, Halo Reach, Halo 4, 5, and Infinite were all Halo games that started their development with Sprint in mind. But what made this remake so contentious is that, well, it's a remake of Halo 1, a game that wasn't designed with Sprint. You can sprint infinitely in this remake. It's much faster than Infinite Sprint, and it has no trade-offs like no regenerating shields or a finite stamina meter, or even making it an external sandbox item you need to find, sort of like an armor ability. It just is a sprint button in Halo 1 with absolutely no downsides. And this remake isn't quite the same scale as others in the industry, like Resident Evil 2, Silent Hill 2, and so on, where they're functionally new video games due to how everything had to be rebuilt. Unreal Engine powers the graphical side of this remake, but under the hood, it's using the Halo Reach engine. Physics, enemy AI, behaviors, and animations, etc. are all pulled from Reach. Like, on one hand, it's cool that it's gonna feel so similar to a Bungie-era Halo game, to the point that they've made this hybrid Reach and Unreal Engine. On the other hand, it means this remake is using a combat loop, enemy balancing, and game systems tuned around Sprint being a finite armor ability, not in unlimited ammo super fast sprint button. Now, Halo Studios made it very clear that Sprint in this remake will be optional, with a toggle being included in the final release, which only sparked more confusion and even mockery, even from Jamie Griesmer himself, a developer of the original Halo game. Jamie Griesmer commented that the sprint mechanic in the remake feels kinda like the developers abandoning their post and refusing to commit to a gameplay vision. Now, it's not just him, that's actually a sentiment that other content creators like The Act Man or Hidden Xperia have also voiced. As if to sort of back up Jamie's points, there were moments in the demo where the devs were moving too quickly through the environments that musical stingers and various environmental effects were failing to play fast enough since, you know, players weren't meant to be moving this fast through these old environments. Now that you sort of get it, it's not even about if we enjoy or dislike Sprint as a mechanic. Sprint is being included in a way that kind of lacks confidence and doesn't feel well thought out as a core part of the game's design. It's a really tough situation for the remake to be in, and a lot of Halo content creators such as Mint Blitz actually had really good takes on the subject, and even went on to break down Jamie Griesmer's thoughts and opinions on Sprint and the remake. How do I feel about Sprint in Halo? I personally think that Halo is more fun when it doesn't have Sprint in it, but I'm also not the most passionate person about that subject anymore these days. I get why people enjoy it, and I get why companies like Microsoft would just kind of do the safe thing and include Sprint, because it's sort of become standardized as an FPS mechanic these days. The reason I prefer Halo without Sprint kinda comes from a sense of 360-degree fluidity in the combat and mobility. I enjoy changing directions without feeling like I need to dramatically slow down my speed, or even turn around while moving forwards at max speed and shoot backwards at Flood, Covenant, or enemy players that are giving chase. It's just movement in sprintless Halo to me feels less binary and locked forward, and it feels more fluid and kind of free-flowing. Another thing I also like is that I move and keep pace with other AI and Marine characters. Now, for some of us old heads, think about moments like moving with a pack of Marines along the cliffside on the Truth and Reconciliation mission, or keeping pace with Marines on the level The Ark in Halo 3. When it was time for things to speed up, a vehicle sequence usually happened, which felt like a nice change of pace, which kind of put into perspective the speed and the scale of vehicle combat versus on-foot infantry combat. It feels kind of like in sprintless Halo that there's room for small, claustrophobic rooms, moments, and play spaces, or even just atmospheric story moments where you have to slow down, and they can be perfectly timed because the developers know that you can't just blitz past them with the sprint button. It makes those moments hit harder because you're literally forced to slow down and smell the roses, you know? Take in the music, take in the atmosphere. Now, that's mostly just single-player stuff. I also prefer the way that it feels in multiplayer matches. Since max speed isn't this binary move-forward thing that you get locked into, players tend to be a bit more thoughtful about when or how they should advance on objectives or approach gunfights. It's usually easier for me to kind of get a feel or flow for the multiplayer match because everyone isn't just constantly pushing and pushing because they're locked into their sprint. If a guy is advancing towards me with a sword or a shotgun, I can backpedal at the same speed as him and counter him. It gives me a way to counter some of those insta-kill bullshit close range weapons, and it also forces him to use things like the shotgun and the energy sword more strategically. In the Halo games with sprint, that doesn't really happen, since forward movement is so much faster than backwards movement. Sure, I could just not sprint and have control over the buttons I press, but that doesn't scratch the same itch for me as a game that is built from the ground up, balanced, and has levels and encounters created for it and multiplayer matches that are all designed around not having sprint, Now, the reason that I'm not as passionate about the topic anymore is because, well, I have my own preferences, and I understand that there are people that just have a little bit less patience and they want to get somewhere now, and sprint lets them do that. It lets them pick up the pace when and where they want, and they don't need to rely on vehicles, and they end up enjoying the game better as a result. I don't think they're going to remove sprint from the remake, but I do think that there's time for them to maybe consider if they're going to add sprint to Halo 1, there should probably be some trade-offs to using it. Something that Jamie Griesmer said is that a system in a game is always a trade-off between positive and negatives. Player preferences, toggles, and things, those are genuinely just preferences. Mechanics, though, such as sprinting, shooting, those shouldn't be considered as just preference, A good designer should be looking at the positives and negatives of the system and decide if the trade-offs are worth it. Now, I get that there's some people that are like, it's a single-player game, it's a campaign, why do we care so much about if it feels balanced or whatever? And I don't really like that line of thinking, Whether it's a multiplayer game or a story-based game, balancing still matters, right? The goal of game designers is to make their games feel well thought out and intentionally built. The best games we've ever played are amazing because they're meticulously designed and thought out. Come on, guys. Think a little bit more highly of single-player games. Balancing matters in those games too. At the moment, the version of Sprint in the demo, which I got to play, by the way, I forgot to mention that, has pretty much no consequences to using it. Now, some people will say not being able to fire your gun is a pretty big trade-off, and I'll be honest, that's not nearly enough of a trade-off, especially when the pros are being able to move very fast, being able to move very fast without getting tired, being able to move very fast and outrun encounters, break musical timing, accidentally zip past intended atmospheric moments, and so on, which could accidentally be some player's first experience with the game, completely blitzing past intended moments. Since I don't think that they're going to remove sprint in Halo 1, and I think that's a ridiculous thing to request, what are at least some trade-offs that I think that they could add that could potentially make sprint feel a little bit more organic and neat in Halo 1? What I would do is maybe look towards a stamina or an energy meter with a delay before it begins recharging, similar to Reach's armor ability. Halo 4's stamina, which began instantly replenishing when you stopped sprinting, I think is a little bit too spammy, and the fast, unlimited movement of Halo 5 I don't think fits well into Halo 1. A finite stamina meter with a brief regen delay would make sprint more of a considered choice for players to do, rather than a no-brainer with no trade-offs, It would exist for players who are a bit impatient or need to make a quick rush, but won't last long enough that they risk accidentally disrupting the game in the same way unlimited sprint would. It would encourage players to actually conserve their stamina and consider when and where they want to activate sprint. You could even have small victories where players quickly use their sprint down a hall, but then they have to walk the rest of the way, so some of those intended story moments or atmospheric bits stay somewhat preserved. The best part is if there are players that genuinely don't care about balancing or any of that stuff, they just want to get from point A to point B faster and have infinite supply of it, Halo has gameplay modifiers that could potentially give them that option. Halo's gameplay modifiers are called skulls, and they sort of act like cheat codes. The bandana skull, as an example in previous Halo games, gave you infinite ammo, infinite grenades, in the case of Halo Reach on the Master Chief Collection, infinite armor ability use. If you want unlimited sprint in the Halo 1 remake, you could possibly throw on the bandana skull, and there you go. Now you've got infinite sprint if you want it, while keeping the base game maybe a little bit more balanced. But that's just my idea. How do you think the Halo 1 remake should go about balancing sprint? Now, let's be honest, I'm asking that because it helps with the algorithm. But also, in a more serious note, it is a genuine conversation that I want the Halo community to have. There's a lot of just kind of like anger and yelling and people being like, no, it should not have sprint. Yes, it should absolutely have sprint, and also they should have thrusters and jetpacks and all, but like, the game is what it is right now, but there is still time as they make it to tweak the mechanics that exist in the game. And I think that there's enough time to actually start creating some trade-offs to using sprint. And I'd like the community to start brainstorming what kind of trade-offs they could add so that sprint does feel like there is a pro and a con to activating it, rather than just tearing into each other or taking insanely one-sided stances on the topic. Let's come together as a community and have an honest discussion about potential trade-offs to make sprint an interesting part of the gameplay, as opposed to this thing that just sort of robs the Halo combat loop and the environmental storytelling of some of its charm. Halo fans may be memed as hating Halo more than anyone else, and I don't think that's true, man. Like, we're just passionate. We're really passionate. Dude, we're so passionate, we could argue for hours about which Halo game had the best color green for its grass. And if you're someone who's never thought about sprint as a mechanic before, never really cared, but you were open to hearing my thoughts on it, what did you think? Did I explain myself well? And even if you enjoy infinite sprint and really like it, just humor me. Try to brainstorm ways that you could make sprint feel kind of like it has a lot of tactical consequence to using it, so that there's a bit of risk and reward whenever you activate it. Especially if you like sprint. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Also, feel free to share the video around to your friends, your neighbors, your Reddits, your pets. Spread the message. Halo Studios showed off that Halo remake so early because, specifically, they want feedback on it. Speculation is that it's going to be a holiday release next year, so that gives us about a year to start dialing in and tweaking some of those mechanics. We have about a year to make change happen, and change can happen if we're passionate enough about it, and we start talking as a unified voice about the subject. With that being said, I'll leave you guys to it, and gotta go fast!